Hello everyone, welcome to Crayfish Webinar. Good morning to those of you listening in the UK, and good afternoon to those of you from China, and good day to those in the rest of the world. So today's webinar, we're going to talk about how to choose the right registered office address for your China investment. I will be your host today, and my name is Jiao, and I'm the co-founder of Crayfish. For those who are new to Crayfish and our webinar, the presentation lasts about 40 minutes, and then we have 5 minutes question and answers at the end of each session. Anytime through the webinar, you can send the questions through by clicking the question button on your control panel on your right-hand side during the presentation. Just quickly to introduce you a bit about Crayfish. Our company name is actually crayfish.io, which is also the domain of our platform, the first online marketplace in the world that's dedicated to providing Chinese business expertise on demand. I will tell you more about our platform and services at the end of this session. Now, you have made up your decision that you want to go to China. The question then becomes, where do China. China is such a big country, and there are a lot to consider when it comes to selection of the location. So join us at today's webinar. We will talk about how to choose your registration address and how this may affect your China strategy and also your investment. So the speaker we have today is our beloved friend, Christina Kluscher. Since 2003, Christina has been a leading expert in China inbound investment. With international expertise and cross-industry experience, Christina is detail-oriented with a creative personality and a can-do attitude, which are very important traits to have for Chinese market. She has also supported startups, SMEs, multinationals, and publicly listed companies with their China market entry and expansion, focusing on their legal, corporate, tax, and admin needs. So now let's start the session. Over to you, Christina.
Thank you, Jiao. Thank you very much for having me today. Good morning to everybody that is online. Today we will be talking about how to choose the right registered office address for your China investment, which might sound a bit strange considering that wherever else you locate in the rest of the world, in the UK and Hong Kong and Singapore, having a registered office address, you have choices of having virtual offices, or you just choose an office space that you actually like. The issue here in China is that there are a lot of legal and tax consequences that can occur by just choosing your registered office address. And I want to go in greater detail today about how important these considerations are when looking for an office space. Next slide. So the first slide is the generic 10 key points that any real estate agent will provide to you in saying, give me an idea about these 10 points in terms of choosing your location, right? What's your style of operation? Are you a formal, elegant type of company, or are you a startup where you're more kickback, relaxed, casual? Obviously, the style and image of your organization is going to reflect on your office location, right? What's the image of your office that you're trying to portray, because it's the first point of entry when you come into that office space. And it's important to note that in China now you have all different types of offices, everything from co-working spaces to business centers to having your own actual commercial space, plus then factories and logistics and warehouses and whatnot. So it's important to know what's your style. It's important to look at the demographics, right? Are you going to be able to find employees for your organization in that area that you are choosing as your office location? What are the demographics? Is there more retired people? Is it more of a younger generation? Or are there this mid-category of employees that are located there? Foot traffic, highly important for retail businesses. I actually had one client in Shanghai who set up a gelateria on the 3rd floor of a shopping mall. They got 0 foot traffic, and after 3 months closed down their business because of that. So it's important to note when, whatever sector you're in, if you are in retail, looking at the foot traffic that's associated. Looking at the accessibility, is it easy to find your office? Is there parking that's available? Looking at also your competition, is anyone located nearby that can cause issues? Are you close to other businesses and services? So for example, your employees will want to know, are there decent transport links? Are there restaurants for lunch? Are there restaurants potentially for dinner if you have to work overtime? They'll want to look at the image and the history of the site. You don't necessarily want to be in a building that was constructed 40 years ago in Shanghai, because I can tell you now the bathrooms itself are something you probably wouldn't want to go into. So you would want to know a bit of the history of the building, who owns it, etc. Definitely look at the regulations associated with the building within that district. It could very well be that you might not have the license, the landlord might not have the licenses allowed to lease to you. Look at the building's infrastructure, and also look at the utility and costs. These are like the top 10 key points any real estate agent will provide to you that you need to decide on how to choose your office space. But now let's look at what is specific pertaining to China. So I'm sure you've all read and heard about these new free trade zones. Well, by now they're not new any longer, but I've still added new in so people can have a feeling of what they actually mean. What's important about the free trade zones is that you do get certain advantages, not tax advantages, but you do get advantages in terms of customs, trade flow, etc. In order to be located in these free trade zones, your business should not be on the negative list. The negative list is basically a list of sectors and industries that are either prohibited or restricted in China. If they're prohibited, it means the foreign investor cannot invest in that company. If they are restricted, then it means that means you need a joint venture structure. So be wary of the negative list, take a look at the free trade zones and see whether by being located there, it offers you any advantages in regards to your trade flow. In short, just one sentence in regards to the trade flow. If you are looking to import container loads and sell these container loads directly to distributors, the free trade zone doesn't give you any advantages. If, however, you are looking to sell on consignment, meaning you bring in a 40-foot container and you are selling maybe 3 or 4 pallets at a time to distributors, that does give you a cash flow advantage. Because when the container arrives, you don't have to pay customs duty yet, nor VAT. You only pay these things upon consignment and specific to that quantity once they're provided to the distributor. So that's one of the advantages of being in one of these free trade zones. Next slide. Now, we all know that manufacturing, I don't want to say it's dying in China, but there are definitely fewer companies that are locating themselves in the locating themselves for manufacturing within China. But what I am seeing is that for those people that are still looking to manufacture, where are they going? They're going to basically 6 different regions. One is obviously Shanghai and its surrounding region of Jiangsu and Zhejiang province. They're going to Beijing and Tianjin area, which is again point 2 and 3. They're going to Guangzhou in the south or Shenzhen. And then there's also this whole Go West campaign where people are moving out towards Chengdu, Chongqing, Inner Mongolia, Guangxi, Sichuan, that type of areas. Many of these cities are not necessarily sector or industry specific, although you will find, for example, in Shenzhen, a lot of toy manufacturers. You will find in Shanghai a lot of pharmaceutical and automobile manufacturers. So there are certain areas that are kind of sector industry specific, but not necessarily. Next slide. Now, we're going to start off with the most critical part of today's presentation, which is looking at the legal considerations, and then we'll move on to the tax considerations. So one thing I do want to mention is I'm not a real estate agent, and I'm certainly not the person to reach out to if you are looking to understand where in China, which is a huge country, where you should be located. There are so many factors that you need to consider. You need to look at where your suppliers are, where your customers are, where the ports are, where are you going to find employees. There's just tremendous amounts of considerations that you have to make. Real estate agents generally in China offer location studies where they will give you the pros and cons related to certain zones or districts or cities within China and provide you with a type of analysis of where it might be great for you to locate your company. So do please keep that in mind in terms of talking to real estate agents about helping you to narrow down and filter where you should be located. The key thing, once you've narrowed down where in China you want to be, whether it's a free trade zone, whether it's in Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Chengdu, Chongqing, Beijing, Tianjin, Nanjing, wherever, all the legal considerations and tax considerations apply, regardless of where you want to be. So the first important aspect when you're setting up your company in China is you must have a registered office address. This is the first thing you actually need to do when you go into the Chinese market. You need to find an address location and you need to have signed the lease agreement. This address will be used for the name approval application. So creating the name of your Chinese company. It's important that when you choose your registered office address, it's not in a residential location. This is prohibited in China. It must be in a commercial space that's either a commercial building, a retail space, or an industrial property. The lease agreements, together with further documents from the landlord, will be provided to the government upon application of your company. Next slide. Now, as in most countries around the world, a virtual office address is acceptable to be used as your registered office address. However, in China, it is illegal. In China, you must, when you register your company, it is a requirement that there is an office with 4 walls and a door. An office with 4 walls and a door. It doesn't matter the size of that room, but that room number must be for you, okay? The idea of a virtual office concept is not permitted. Now, does it exist? Yes, it does. Is it recommended? It is not recommended because there are plenty of spot checks that do occur by the government. And if they realize that you are in a space, first of all, it might get the landlord in trouble, but second, more importantly, it might get you in trouble for not realizing that something like this is illegal, and it can prevent you from actually establishing your business. But even further down the line, when there are these spot checks, you know, someone from the tax bureau or someone from the AIC might pop by your office to see if anybody is there. So it's important to note that this is just, it's not permitted. You should try and avoid it. Now, I can't go on to the next slide without telling you, however, that business centers in China generally do provide for the registration process something that is called a registered office address service only for registration solution. And what that basically means is that the business centers have these very, very tiny 4 square meter offices available that they can lease out for these registration periods. And it's not something that actually should be permanent for your establishment, because ultimately what the government wants to see is that you do become operational and you do start hiring people. So just so you know, the business centers offer this. You shouldn't extend it for a period of a year or more of operation. You should then upgrade to a larger size office. One of the requirements when you establish your company is that you need to sign at least a 1-year lease agreement. Any agreement shorter than this just won't be approved during the registration process. Now, what is important here is that I get a lot of clients when they are establishing their company in China, not all decisions are clarified yet. And what I mean by that is they know that they have to get the office first, so they do that in a rush and they do it very quickly. But then they haven't still decided upon financing, what's the registered capital should be. They haven't decided on the validity term. They haven't decided on the corporate structure. And when you have to discuss these things with board of directors, this can take quite a considerable amount of time. So what I've seen happen a lot is that you will sign a lease agreement, but the actual formal submission of the documents for the application of the company doesn't happen until 6 or 7 months later from that. The government will come back and say you need to re-sign your lease agreement so that it is current. Because with only 4 or 5 months left in the lease, that's not a 1-year lease. So my recommendation is don't sign a lease until you are sure that immediately thereafter you're going to submit the documents needed for the application of the company. Next slide. Now, one of the most critical aspects of establishing your company is defining what your business scope is going to be. And you also have to realize that the type of property you choose should match what you're writing in your business scope. So if you are writing in your business scope that you are going to be doing retail, then the property you choose should be a retail outlet. If your business scope is highlighting that you're going to be doing assembly and warehouse, then a commercial office space is not going to be suitable for that type of business scope. They're going to expect you to sign a lease with a warehouse. So you've got to understand that everything has to match and make sense. So the type of property you choose has to match the business scope that you are creating during the establishment of the company. The next slide. Now, as I highlighted earlier, virtual offices are not permitted in China. They're illegal. You need to have a room with 4 walls and a door. Now, the key aspect to this is that one company can be registered in only one registered office space. So whereas in Hong Kong, you can have a corporate secretary or a corporate service provider register over 200 companies at their own office location, this does not exist in China, okay? So why this is critical is because I know a lot of companies that have either suppliers, partners, distributors, whomever, let's call them a partner, that they want to sublease from because they want to be in that same office space. Now, if you want to sublease a space, the key aspect is thinking, okay, does this office space that is already with my partner, can it be separated so that I have a separate room number? That's number one. Number two, if your partner is leasing themselves, they need to get the permission from their landlord to sublease to you, right? And if you're going to have a partner that's located in room 10A, and now you've got to split that room into 10A and 10B because your company is going to be registered in 10B, you have to actually build a partition wall to separate the 2 rooms. Because as I mentioned, each company has to have a room with 4 walls and a door, separated. Now, the key thing about separating and having 10A, 10B is you need to go to the real estate bureau and get an application that for this single property, so this single office space, it's going to be separated into 2 separate rooms, and you need to get permission and applications for that, which is why it's important that the landlord is aware of it and you get the permission from the landlord. It does make things extremely complicated. So if you are thinking that you want to be near your partner, I would recommend just trying to find another office space in that same building. If obviously they have the solution of having separate rooms, then by all means, not a problem at all. Next slide. Now, if you haven't done your research and you haven't done a location study and you are now realizing 6 months, 8 months, 1 year, 2 years after your establishment that the location, that city you have chosen is not successful for your business and you want to change cities, this is not easy to do. It's not a simple, oh, I'm based in Shanghai, now I want my company to be in Beijing, I'll just move it. No. Every city in China has its own governmental institution where you are applying for your company license, which means that if you want to change cities, you have to set up a brand new company in that city. And usually it takes between 5 to 6 months to establish a company. There are solutions around this. For example, if you've decided that, if you've set up in Shanghai and you now want to be in Beijing, you can also open up a branch company in Beijing, meaning that Shanghai still is the so-called China headquarter and Beijing is then the operational branch. There are solutions around this, but Obviously, this will just cost you more in terms of company maintenance, because each of these companies will have to do its accounting, its tax. They will each have to sign a lease agreement, so there's a rental fee there. You don't want to incur this additional and extra cost. What you want to do is make sure from the beginning you've chosen the right location for your business. So definitely think about doing these location studies as part of your market research analysis when choosing where you should be in China. Next slide. So the next slide is basically my summary. Choose your city wisely, do your research, and make sure that you're choosing the right location in terms of that. Next slide. Now we're looking at the tax considerations. So each city in China is made up of districts. So if I take Shanghai as an example, you've got Pudong District, which is now part of the Shanghai Free Trade Zone, which is its own separate government entity. You have Luan District, you have Channing District, you have Jing'an District, you have Wangpu District. When you establish your company, you have to then register your company with your district tax bureau. So if you've decided the city is Shanghai, the district within Shanghai that you want to set up in is going to be Huangpu District, then you are going to register with the Huangpu Tax Bureau. Every tax bureau in China is quite different, functions differently. You can consider it as a competition. In Shanghai, for example, each district tax bureau is competing against each other to earn more tax income. So when you choose your tax bureaus, you obviously want to try, when you choose your office, you also want to then choose a district where you kind of know that the tax bureaus are flexible, easy to negotiate with, etc. A couple of examples: if you go within the free trade zone and you're locating your office in Pudong, the Pudong Tax Bureau is not the easiest. They're quite slow, they're pretty much inefficient. On the Puxi side of Shanghai, Jing'an is the most efficient, but they will also try and get as much tax income out of you as possible. Huangpu, Channing are quite flexible in terms of working with them. So do keep this in the back of your mind. Next slide. Now, for me, this is really important, is the tax incentives that are being offered by the state or the local government. If you are not going to choose to be located in a big city like Shanghai, Beijing, even like Nanjing, Wuxi, Wuhan, Suzhou, these cities now have really gone up in terms of maturity, and as a result, they are sticking to the overall tax policies that exist in China. If, however, you go further deep into these villages, these tier 3, tier 4 cities, and that's where you actually want to establish your business, and you find these specific zones, you will have promotion bureaus that will offer you certain incentives. The key thing about these incentives is one, and part of it's not only tax incentives that they might offer you, they may also offer you rental-free periods. For example, if you're setting up a plant, they may give you up to 5 years rental-free. Now, what I find is a big dilemma with these state and local governments is that they promise you things verbally or on a marketing document, but they don't put anything formalized as an agreement. And as a consequence, the person you've been negotiating with or whoever, if he changes jobs and now there's a new person in, they will have no idea what has been negotiated or agreed upon because nothing is on paper. So it's all good going into a zone or going into a city or a small village, being promised certain incentives and them actually not coming through. It can impact your budget tremendously. So if you do go into these areas, make sure that you get something on paper, and most critical, you get the government, the local government CHOP placed on that document, because then it's a done deal. You know that you're going to get these incentives. And then obviously it helps you to create a proper, clear, and transparent budget for your business. On the next slide, we look at a little bit at one of the incentives that is actually being offered throughout China, which is the high and new technology enterprises incentive criteria. So here, the biggest incentive is the fact that you get a corporate income, a profits tax income reduction from 25% to 15%. There are certain criteria that you need to abide by in order to be able to apply for this status. I have applied for this status for a number of clients. And as you can imagine, it is a fight with the tax bureau to get approvals, because what is the aim of the tax bureau? It's to earn the highest level of tax income possible. So for them, getting an application like this, they're going to fight you and make sure that your criteria are so transparent and bulletproof that they will then approve it. If your criteria are quite airy-fairy, you won't get it approved. A lot of my small, medium-sized companies that I work with, I try to push them to not give themselves the guarantee that they will get this type of approval. So that when they create the budget, they're basing it on, for example, a 25% profits tax rate versus a 15% profits tax rate. Next slide. The next slide is just looking at the types of industries that can apply for this HNTE license or approval status. So it's not every single industry out there. Next slide. Now this is an extremely critical point. So we've gone from looking at a macro level saying, okay, here's China. Where in China should I be located? There are so many cities, zones, etc. We're going to do a location study to filter it out and look for a city that's suitable for us. Then at that point, we're going to look for an office space in one of the districts that is kind of tax friendly, right? Where the tax bureaus are a little bit cooperative and helpful and whatnot. Now, what happens if after 5 years, you've grown so much that your office space does not fit the amount of people you have, and you need to expand into a bigger space? And you are, for example, in Shanghai, you're in Huangpu district, and you just have not found a suitable new office space that can agree to your expansion plans. So you're going to look outside of that district, probably in Jing'an, Channing, Pudong, wherever. The real estate agent will show you around to look at these new spaces. Now, this is a key aspect. When you move from one district tax bureau to another district tax bureau, you will have 3 to 4 months where your business will be halted because you will not be able to purchase VAT invoices for domestic sales, and you will not be able to complete any of your tax filings. There'll be a delay. Now, this is extremely critical because it does halt your business for a 3 to 4 month period. This is a piece of information that you need to know before you're even entering China, because you want to choose a district. For example, in Shanghai, you want to choose a district where you know that now at my startup phase, I'm in a great position. There's great image. It fits exactly what I'm looking for the location profile. But I also know that in 5 years I expand, I know there's going to be enough office space capabilities that I can expand, that I can move up into a larger sized office. And like that, by remaining in the district, you have no issues with the halt of your business. If, however, you decide to move districts, this can be a huge consequence for you, particularly if you're in e-commerce or retail, where issuing VAT invoices occurs almost daily. So you need to be truly aware of the macro, where in China should I be located, filtering that down, and then when you've chosen a city, filtering it down to a district that you know in the short and long term fits your expansion plans in China. Next slide. Now, here I finished the legal and the tax considerations in terms of choosing an office space in China. The next 2 slides look at, whether you need to have an offshore holding company to hold that business that you're creating in China. Historically, Hong Kong and Singapore were commonly used by foreign investors to to establish these type of offshore holding companies. And the biggest question nowadays that's being asked is, do those type of structures still exist? Are they popular? You know, what are their advantages, if any, and what are their disadvantages, if any? Now, currently, we see more disadvantages by having these offshore holding companies. And nowadays, it could be not just Hong Kong and Singapore. It could also be Guernsey, Isle of Man, Jersey, etc. Which again, we don't recommend those type of jurisdictions because they're known in China as being tax havens. So the key thing about these offshore holding companies and why we see them as not being so effective is the fact that if they don't show substance in the form of commercial substance or economic substance, basically meaning there's no operational activity that's occurring in these holding companies, then you won't get the advantages of the double taxation agreements. You'll have more scrutiny that's placed on the company over time as you're trying to repatriate funds. And most importantly now, you may have also issues with the corporate bank account that you open for this type of structure, whereby it could be closed from one day to the next because there has been no operational activity over a certain period of time. So in short, do I recommend using these offshore holding structures? Actually, no. I'm seeing now much more that companies are going direct from their headquarters into China and establishing their businesses there. Next question, next slide, sorry. The next slide highlights the best question I think of all, which is Hong Kong a better option than China? And I left this slide at the end because obviously after hearing all of the legal considerations, tax considerations, having to do a location study, and China being just such a huge jurisdiction, it's overwhelming. So I do get a lot of questions. Is Hong Kong a better alternative to China, at least in the startup phase? There's no right or wrong answer to this. Basically, my answer to you would be you need to look at your business plan, your business strategy, and analyze whether being in Hong Kong and having a virtual office concept, which is permitted in Hong Kong, initially will help you to drive your business and your growth in China as expected within your business plan, within the period of your business plan. You know, you've got to look at, you know, your competition, the employees you're finding, suppliers, customers, financial status, money flow between Hong Kong and China, because it is critical to know that Hong Kong is still not yet China. It's one country, but two systems and two very different systems. So it's important to analyze yourself whether Hong Kong makes sense. A question I do get asked a lot is, from a cost perspective, opening a company in Hong Kong and making it operational, meaning having an office with staff, what is the price differential with China? Now, China, you have to choose a city for me to analyze that. So if I would take Shanghai, which is probably one of the most expensive cities in China, if you are looking at rental prices, it's very similar, very similar. If you are looking at salaries, actually the salary wages in China are almost on par with Hong Kong salaries and wages. So if you do an apples to apples comparison like that, you will find that actually Hong Kong and Shanghai are quite similar in terms of a business price comparison in terms of commercial real estate, employees' wages, utilities, and costs, etc. The big question now is, does it make sense for you to start up your business in Hong Kong and then move on to China, or does it make sense to start off in China first from a commercial business perspective? The last slide. The last slide is just a summary of today's presentation and some of the key points and keywords that I kind of want to highlight to you. So the first one is location, location, location. If you are in the retail sector, you will know how critical the location of your business is in order to drive foot traffic. But also, if you are in the commercial sector, whether you are a service company or a trading company, location might be a critical point from you from a logistical perspective and an image perspective. So it is important to make an analysis of what will be the right location for you. You've got to determine your rental budget, okay? You've got to create a budget. That is usually step one. You've got to know how much you're willing to spend for a commercial space or warehouse space or retail space. Your location will affect your operation. It will affect sales, it will affect talent acquisition, it will affect talent retention, it will affect your logistics, and obviously we move on to the fact that it will affect also legal and tax considerations. So definitely don't rush into making a decision. Meet with real estate agents, try to formulate a location study to understand where you want to be located. I have a lot of clients who make decisions based on where staff are located, existing staff. So they might not have an entity in China, but they might be employing people from abroad. And then they base the location of where those people are. There is very high turnover of people in China. So you may not want to necessarily choose a location based on where the staff are. You know, you've got to make these analyses to understand what is the right location for the business. And definitely meet with real estate agents, meet with corporate service providers, meet with legal professionals. Have your lease agreements reviewed by legal professionals to make sure they're bulletproof for you if you ever want to exit that contract. It is critical for your long-term strategy. So, Jiao, that's the end of today's presentation.
Yeah, thanks very much, Christina. It's really helpful information and useful for the audience, I'm sure. So let's move to the next slide. Before we take questions, I would like to tell you a bit more about how Crayfish can help you with your business in China. In addition to the self-service marketplace, we also offer tailored services for more complex projects or bigger projects. The areas that we can help you include doing business with China, from market entry to IP protection, from translation to marketing, from HR to sourcing. Specifically on setting up in China, we work closely with Woodburn on this type of services. So if you guys have any inquiries, please do send it after our webinar today. So these are the two upcoming webinars that are going to happen in June. The first one is going to happen next Monday, and we are actually Woodburn is hosting the webinar, and we will be there as a guest to talk about what the effective communication is between East and the West. And on 18th of June, we'll have Simone from Alibaba to talk about e-commerce in China. So do go to our website and register those two if you are interested. So question time. Because of the time consideration, we are only going to take 2 questions, and the rest of the questions will be sent to Christina afterwards, and she will reply to you privately. So the first question, Christina, is I have heard that registration of a company is the easiest in Shanghai. So should we then set up in Shanghai, or should we decide otherwise?
Again, I mean, that's a good question. So yeah, I mean, currently registrations of companies are more easier from my experience in Shanghai. I'm currently doing actually 3 different registrations in Tianjin, in Beijing, and in Shanghai. And so far the experience right now has been that Shanghai is a lot easier and a lot quicker. However, if your business is going to be centralized out of Beijing, or your business is going to be centralized out of Tianjin or Shenzhen or Guangzhou, and that is actually where you should be establishing your business. You should not be focusing on speed of incorporating a company. You should be thinking about the longevity of your company in China. And you know, where it's going to be located is going to be critical. Like I mentioned, if you suddenly want to move locations, think about all the legal and tax considerations that I went through today to understand, you know, how vital it is and how much money you might have to spend later on to fix the primary location you chose.
Cool. The second question, and will be the last question of today, is Is there any place that we should avoid setting up in China? What's your advice?
Is there any place you should avoid? Well, it's a bit of a vague question. I don't think that there is any place that you should avoid if it is critical to your business. I just think that the tier 1 and a lot of the tier 2 cities on the east coast of China are mature. So in terms of setting up your company, in terms of the operation and maintenance of your company, and I also think in terms of the stability of employees, which is probably, you know, also a big critical factor, these cities are very mature. Avoiding places, you know, tier 3, tier 4 cities, if you're looking to hire expats, I would not want to live in a tier 3 or tier 4 city myself. It depends on, you know, what is your business operation looking like. If you're going into that location because you found a great spot for building up your manufacturing facility, then by all means, you should be going into that village and you should be locating there. So I can't really say that there is any city or place that you should avoid. I think it really comes down again to doing an analysis and understanding what is the right location for your business.
Cool, good. So I know there are more questions coming up, but we will send, as I mentioned, we will send the questions to Christina and she will answer to you directly by email. So thank you very much, Christina, for giving us the session today, and thanks very much to the audience for those who attend. Afterwards, we'll send a follow-up email with a link to the recording of today so that you guys can keep a copy of it. Look forward to seeing you guys next time, and thanks again, Christina.
No, thanks again, Zhao, and thank you to everyone for joining today.
Bye.